Hello, good evening, guys. Today is evening, and before I sleep, I'm drinking this apple cider vinegar. I'm going to show you how. Kunti na lang siya. Ito na yung aking apple cider vinegar mixed with water, and pag inumin ko siya is with straw. Dahil acidic, may acid siya, so masira yung ngipin pag hindi na direct siya na dapat nakastraw siya. Nambos ka na. So guys, good evening. Yung iniinom kong apple cider vinegar is dapat morning siya rin pwede, pero iniinom ko lang siya is evening lang. So every time I drink apple cider vinegar is only evening, one time lang siya. I mix siya with water, at saka kung iinumin siya with straw kasi acidic siya, masisira yung madaling masira yung ngipin. Today I am reading this Finding Happiness Against the Odds. I cried a lot because of the story of this man, Wesley. He was born with Calspre palsy. Yeah, and as I show you, he got the picture with Nick Vujicic. Yeah, I see this one. Yan siya. So I want to read this story, pero I will see if dami akong luhang na I have a lot of tears. When I finished this story, I cried a lot because very sad how his childhood and how his parents treat him because of his disability. The early years, a childhood to forget. I was born on the 16th of March 1979. This should have been a joyous occasion, but when I was born, the doctor told my mother that I was a blue baby. This meant that I did not get enough oxygen to my brain either inside my mother's womb or as a result of a deafened birth. This caused some damage in the areas of my brain that controlled movement. My parents were informed that I had a condition called cerebral palsy. There was no cure for it, and the effects would be permanent and severe. According to my grandma, after I was born and my parents realized that I was physically disabled, they were not interested in naming me. So when the hospital asked for my name, my mother's sister's friend, who was working in the hospital, was the one who named me. However, later my mother changed her mind and decided to name me Wesley. My grandma chose to call me John Boy, and that's what I had always been known as a family and family friends. My parents were not the kind of people who could accept a disabled child, and in their hearts they rejected me. They didn't want to take care of me and asked my grandma if she should look after me instead. She ignored my grandma. She agreed. My grandma was my mother's mother, and she was the only one who really cared about me. In those early years. She loved me, protected me, and looked after my physical and emotional needs. She fed and bathed me, dressed me, and later, as I grew older, helped me with my physical therapy exercise. I never felt that love and care from my parents, so not surprisingly, I always wanted to be with my grandma. I knew her love for me was real from the way she cared for me and nurtured me. She never physically hurt me, as far as I can remember. She would clean me up carefully and slowly whenever I urinated or had extreme in my pants. Through all of this, she never at any time made me feel unloved. During those years, I stayed with my grandma during the week and moved back to my parents' house at the weekend. My mother could not wait to hand me back on Sunday, and there was a stark difference between the days I spent with my grandma and those spent with my parents. As I grew up, I quickly realized that I was not like other children. I didn't learn to move as expected, and I couldn't control the muscles in my mouth, so eating and learning to talk were very challenging for me. My father was a military officer in the Navy, and my mother was a housewife. I have two brothers, one 3 years older than me and the other 3 years old younger. Both my brothers were born blessed with healthy bodies. We live in a large apartment block in a 3-bedroom apartment. The apartment never felt like at home to me. I remember it is a place that was filled with pain, not just physical pain but emotional pain. As far back as I can remember, my family saw me as a burden. They spent very little time looking after me and attending to my needs. I was often ignored and left to my own very limited devices. Being young with big physical needs meant I needed a lot of help, as it was impossible for me to master skills that other non-disabled children did. For example, I was slower at toilet training, and I often urinated and defecated on myself and my bed, making me a very smelly child. My mother always made sure that when my brothers were little, they had clean diapers, but there was never a diaper or nappy cloth for me. Our toilet was about 20 adult steps from my room, and so as soon as I was able to move myself, I had to crawl there every time I needed to go. To me, this felt like climbing a mountain. Very often, I would crawl desperately from my bedroom to try to reach the toilet, but would be unable to get there in time and would end up making a mess. On days when my mother went out to do her marketing, I would be left alone at home. Once in her absence, I felt the need to go to the toilet, but of course I never made it in time. I couldn't stop my bodily function, and when my mother returned home, she found me lying on the floor covered in urine and piss. On such occasions, she would get so violently angry that she would hit me all over my body, including my face. The pain would be so bad that I couldn't even cry. I was gasping for air. This happened randomly from when I was about 6 to 11 years of age. Only when she was satisfied that she had hit me enough would she stop, clean me up roughly, and put me back in my bed again without a diaper. My mother took out her anger at my helplessness in different ways. Sometimes she would stand on my head while I was lying down on the floor. At other times, she would hit my head against the wall or struggle me with a leather belt. I want to walk. As far back as I can remember, I was constantly being abused by both of my parents. I knew from a young age that they did not want me and that they wished I had never been born. My father, the naval officer, was a strong, stern man. He had that never give up attitude and believed that strict discipline was the best way to parent. He wanted me to walk. So every night he would get my walker and would begin my walking exercise. This consisted of me trying to walk around our living room over and over again. Although the room was only about 6 meters in length and in total, it seemed huge and daunting to me. What made this exercise regime even worse was that it would often began around 10 p.m. when I was already exhausted. My father would tell me that I had to finish 10 rounds before I could go to bed, and he would yell at me saying that if I couldn't finish 10 rounds, then he would add 10 more rounds the next day. If the next day I couldn't finish 20, then it would be go up to 30. If I could finish 10 rounds before midnight, then I was allowed to stop and go to bed. But if I could not finish before midnight, I often had to continue up to around 2 a.m. and sometimes even 3 a.m. If I was able to walk well enough to please my father, then he would let me go to bed, but this was rare as such a challenging thing for me to do. Sometimes, if my father was having a day off from work or had come home early, I would be able to do my walking in the early evening. Every time I walk, I would start crying after about 6 rounds because it was so painful and my legs would shaking. We could start my walking routine before I had eaten dinner on these days, and I was not given any dinner unless I succeeded in walking enough rounds to please my father. If I pleased him, he would feed me. If I didn't, I would go to bed hungry. My big brother would often see me crying, but he never showed me any compassion and never said anything to our parents whenever this was happening. Not achieved at what expected to me, my father would begin to resort to physically abusing me. He would shout at me and my mother would watch sternly as she stood by his side. "I want to walk," he would shout. "I want you to walk," he would shout. "If you don't, I will drag you to the toilet." He would say this in such a loud, threatening voice that I would be terrified before we even started. I recall that his eyes seemed big and very scary when he got angry. Many times I remember being so afraid that I would tremble. It has always been very difficult for me to control some parts of my body. Even now, I am unable to bring spoon to my mouth to feed myself because my movements are jerky and my grasp is poor. So controlling my arms and hands when having a hold on to move a walker was almost impossible. I also had great difficulty bearing any weight on my legs. The effort of moving the walker forward even a meter or two was arduous and painful for me to do, and I think was mostly achieved through the fear of what would happen if I failed. So I would put every ounce of strength I had into trying to do it to please my father. However, I could never meet his expectation. When my father eventually left the room, frustrated and disappointed in me, I would be completely exhausted, but still I had to crawl back to my room and struggle up onto my bed. I would feel immense shame at this time, knowing that I had failed him again. When I crawled, my feet dragged him behind me, and I would always have areas where the skin was scraped off, leaving those parts raw and painful. I developed calluses on my fingers too. One night, after the exercise were over and my father had left the room, he suddenly returned, storming over to me and grabbing my legs. He then dragged me across the hard floor, whilst I screamed and wailed, ignoring me. He continued to drag me into the bathroom, and only afterwards did I realize what my father had meant by his threats about the toilet. I saw a big green garbage tub filled with water in the bathroom and was confused and scared. My father was fit and strong, whilst I was a frail, underweight child. He grabbed me tightly around an ankle and lifted me off the floor until I was upside down. I remember struggling weakly in his hands. He held me above the tub and lowered me head first into it, using his other hand to hold my hand under the water as I struggled. I could feel the water filling my nose and mouth and experienced the terror of not being able to breathe before he lifted me out and let me grasp for some air. As soon as I was able to take some grasping breath, he would lower me back into the tub, holding my head under again. I don't know how long this went on, but it felt like eternity to me. This was the first water torture. I experienced, but it would happen many times. Sometimes my father would vary the punishment and hold my face under a running tap instead. His eyes would be wide and bulging, and his anger at me. I stopped the recording because my phone need to charge. And okay guys, good evening and good night. I'm going to read the book continuously and part 2. God bless.